The cold wind bit at her cheeks as she huddled under the thin blanket she had managed to find in a trash-strewn alley. Her clothes were worn and patched, evidence of months spent surviving on the streets. She had learned to move quietly, avoid confrontations, and steal small meals when she could, but tonight the hunger gnawed at her in a way that made her hands shake. She didn't know how long she could last like this, yet she had grown accustomed to the harshness of life, accepting it as her only reality. As she adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, a sudden noise caught her attention, the roar of a motorcycle engine echoing down the deserted street. Curiosity and caution mixed within her. Most people avoided her gaze, and most vehicles passed without slowing down. But tonight, the motorcycle skidded slightly on the wet pavement, the rider clearly struggling to maintain control. She watched, frozen for a moment, as he lost balance and tumbled off the bike, landing hard on the ground. Without thinking, she sprang to her feet. Hunger and fear were powerful, but so was the instinct to help someone in immediate danger. She dashed toward him, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding her veins. When she reached him, she saw that he was bleeding from his arm and had a deep scrape across his leg. The biker groaned, pain etched on his handsome features, though his clothes and helmet were expensive, leather gloves, branded jacket, boots that cost more than she earned in a month. Yet she didn't care about that. All she saw was a person who needed help. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He attempted to sit up but winced sharply. I think I twisted my leg," he admitted, the words barely audible. She looked around, realizing there was no one else on the street, no taxis, no passerby to call for help. "I can help," she said, more firmly now. She tore a piece of her blanket and tried to apply pressure to his wound, despite having no real medical knowledge. She wrapped his arm as best as she could, talking to him to keep him conscious. "You'll be okay," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, and gave a faint smile. "Thanks. Not many people would stop," he said, his voice rough with pain. She shrugged, trying to mask the uncertainty she felt inside. Helping others wasn't a choice for her, it was survival in a way, a reminder that she was still human, still capable of kindness despite everything life had taken from her. The night stretched on as she helped him move toward a safer spot, a small covered area where he could rest. She asked about his bike, about how he ended up here, but he only gave vague answers, avoiding specifics. She didn't press. She had learned early that people could be unpredictable, and secrets were best left unexamined. Still, there was something about him that felt different, not just in the way he spoke but in the way he looked at the world, even now in pain. Hours passed, and he finally relaxed slightly, leaning back against the wall. She offered him a small piece of bread she had managed to scavenge earlier, and he took it gratefully, his movements careful. He tried to thank her again, this time with more sincerity, and she nodded, shrugging off the compliment. She wasn't used to praise. Her life was made up of small victories, quiet moments of survival, not grand acknowledgments. As dawn approached, the first faint light of morning spilling across the alley, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note. "I want you to have this," he said, handing it to her. She unfolded it, expecting perhaps an address or a number, but inside was something far more significant, a card with a name she didn't recognize and a message that promised help, opportunity, and security far beyond what she had ever imagined. Her hands shook as she looked up at him, disbelief clear in her eyes. He laughed softly, the sound warm despite the lingering pain. "You saved me tonight," he said. "Now let me help you. You deserve better than this life." She felt a rush of emotions, fear, hope, uncertainty, and a strange sense of connection. She had never experienced kindness like this from anyone outside her small circle of fellow street survivors. And yet, there was a sincerity in his eyes, a promise that tonight could mark the beginning of something new. She didn't know what the future held or how her life might change, but she knew one thing for certain. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, valued, and capable of more than mere survival. As the city slowly came to life around them, she sat there, watching him carefully, considering what it might mean to trust someone, especially someone whose world was so different from her own. The night had been terrifying, exhausting, and painful, but it had also been transformative. She had extended a hand in kindness without expecting anything, and in return, a door had been opened, a door to a world she had only ever dreamed of. For now, she allowed herself a moment of relief, a brief pause from the harshness of her reality, and for the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. The morning sunlight spilled into the alley, illuminating the remnants of the night's cold struggle. She watched him quietly as he tried to adjust his injured leg, still wincing with every small movement. He looked different in the light of day, less like the mysterious stranger she had helped and more like someone who carried the weight of a life she couldn't begin to imagine. She could sense a hesitancy in him, as if he weren't used to being vulnerable around anyone, let alone someone like her, someone without money, without status, without connections. Yet, in that moment, he trusted her. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" she asked, still cautious, unsure how much she should involve herself in his life. He shook his head slightly, trying to push off the discomfort. "I'll manage. I don't want to trouble you," he said. His words carried a mix of pride and exhaustion, and she could see that helping him was changing something inside him, something he hadn't expected. She nodded, understanding exactly what that meant. She had spent her life navigating a world where asking for help could be dangerous, where kindness was rare and fleeting. He took a deep breath and finally revealed a bit more about himself, though carefully. "I'm not just any biker," he admitted, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. "I own a lot. My family, my business, it's complicated. I wasn't planning on showing anyone this side of me. Tonight, I just needed someone." She didn't respond immediately, unsure how to react. The revelation should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it only made the reality of what had happened more surreal. She had saved a billionaire, a man whose world was entirely separate from hers, and yet here he was, relying on her. She helped him up slowly, supporting his weight as he hobbled toward the street. Despite his luxurious clothing and obvious wealth, there was a vulnerability in him that made her feel strangely protective. "You don't have to go anywhere right now," she said softly. "You can rest a little more." He shook his head, forcing a small smile. "I need to get home. But I can't do it alone. Can you help me to my car?" She hesitated, realizing that helping him into a car would take her far from the alley she knew, into a world she had only seen from a distance. And yet, she couldn't turn him away. Compassion had become second nature, and turning away now felt impossible. The ride to his home was quiet, both of them lost in thought. She noticed the expensive car, the sleek lines, and the meticulous details that marked wealth she could barely comprehend. He kept glancing at her, eyes flicking between the road and her face, as if gauging whether she felt out of place. But she didn't. She was aware of the difference in their lives, yes, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She had acted out of instinct, not calculation, and somehow that honesty created a connection neither of them could ignore. Once they arrived, she was led inside a mansion that seemed almost unreal to her eyes. The walls gleamed with polished wood, the furniture exuded elegance, and the air smelled faintly of something she couldn't place, a mixture of wealth and refinement. She felt small and out of place, yet he guided her with careful attention, ensuring she didn't feel embarrassed or unwelcome. "Take a seat," he said gently, leading her to a couch. She sank into it, overwhelmed by the contrast between this life and hers. She had slept on concrete just hours ago, scavenged meals from trash bins, and yet now, she was inside a world she had only seen in movies or magazines. He disappeared briefly and returned with a tray of food, something she couldn't have imagined eating in months. "Eat," he said simply, as if feeding her was the most natural thing in the world. She hesitated, unused to such generosity, but hunger and gratitude overcame her pride. She took a bite, savoring the warmth and taste, realizing just how deprived she had been. He watched her closely, his expression softening. "You've been through a lot," he said quietly. "But you don't have to live like that anymore. I can help." She looked at him, confusion and disbelief swirling in her eyes. Help. She had never known real help, only temporary kindness, fleeting moments that disappeared as quickly as they arrived. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, not arrogantly, but with genuine sincerity. "Because you saved me, and I've learned that no matter how much money I have, what really matters is people. You reminded me of that." The hours passed as they talked, sharing fragments of their lives. She learned about his responsibilities, the pressure he carried, and the loneliness that even wealth could not fill. He learned about her struggles, her dreams, and her resilience in a world that had been cruel to her. They discovered an unexpected understanding, a bridge between two lives that seemed impossible to connect. And for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just as a homeless girl or a stranger, but as a person worthy of respect, kindness, and opportunity. By the time the sun set, she realized that her life had already begun to shift in ways she couldn't have imagined. He wasn't just offering temporary relief, he was offering a chance for a new beginning, a life where survival wasn't the only goal. And while fear lingered, she felt a spark of hope ignite, a belief that perhaps, finally, life could be more than hardship. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that tonight had changed everything, and the bond formed between them would be the first step toward a future neither of them had expected. The days that followed were unlike anything she had ever experienced. For the first time in her life, she had a place to rest that wasn't a cold alley or a crowded shelter. She had warm clothes, proper meals, and, most importantly, someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. Despite the comfort, she couldn't shake a sense of unease, a fear that it was all temporary, that soon she would wake up to the harsh streets again. But each morning, he reminded her that this wasn't a fleeting act of charity, it was an opportunity to rebuild her life. "You don't have to live in survival mode anymore," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "You've already proven how strong you are. Now, let me help you thrive." She found herself slowly opening up to him, sharing the stories she had never told anyone, the nights she had gone hungry, the moments she had felt invisible, and the dreams she had buried because they seemed impossible. He listened without judgment, his presence steady and reassuring. There was something in his eyes that made her feel safe, as if she could reveal her truth without fear of ridicule or dismissal. And he, in turn, shared more of his world, the pressures of running a billion-dollar company, the loneliness that accompanied wealth, and the rare moments of doubt that even success could not erase. In these exchanges, they discovered an unexpected camaraderie, a bond that transcended their differences. One afternoon, he suggested they take a drive outside the city. She hesitated at first, unsure if she belonged in a world so removed from her own, but his encouragement was gentle. "This isn't about wealth," he said. "It's about experiencing life beyond what you've known." The ride was exhilarating, the wind on her face, the freedom of open roads, and the realization that life could hold beauty and adventure beyond mere survival. She laughed for the first time in months, a pure sound that made him smile. In that moment, she began to understand that trust and connection could exist even in the most unlikely places. Back at his mansion, he began to introduce her to opportunities she had never dreamed of. He enrolled her in classes to learn skills that could help her build a career. He introduced her to people who were kind, patient, and willing to guide her, and he encouraged her to explore her passions, whatever they might be. She was overwhelmed by the sudden abundance of choices, but he reminded her that she had the right to dream and to shape her own future. "You've survived this long," he said. "Now it's time to live." Despite the luxury around her, she never forgot where she came from. She would occasionally walk the streets she had once called home, visiting the people she had grown close to, the fellow street survivors who had taught her resilience. She brought them small gifts, offered advice, and shared a warmth that had been absent from their lives for too long. It was a delicate balance, embracing the life he had given her while staying connected to her roots, but she managed it with care, learning that success didn't have to mean forgetting where you came from. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker, he turned to her with a seriousness that made her heart race. "I need you to understand something," he said. "The help I've given you isn't just about generosity. It's about seeing who you are, your strength, your kindness, your courage. I've met thousands of people, but few have shown me what you have. You've changed my perspective on everything." She felt a lump form in her throat. Words had never come easily to her, but she managed a quiet reply. "You gave me a chance I never thought I'd get. You saw me when no one else did." As weeks turned into months, her transformation became undeniable. She had grown more confident, more independent, and more hopeful. She had a clear sense of purpose and a belief that she could shape her own destiny. Yet, she also discovered something deeper, that connection, compassion, and trust were the true measures of wealth, far beyond money or possessions. He had not only changed her circumstances but had also shown her the profound impact of human kindness. One day, he handed her a folder containing papers, business cards, and letters of recommendation. "These are tools," he explained. Use them to build the life you've always wanted. You deserve more than temporary relief. You deserve a future of your own making. She accepted them with trembling hands, realizing that she was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live fully. The fear that had once dominated her thoughts had been replaced with determination, excitement, and hope. The final piece of their journey together came unexpectedly. They returned to the alley where they had first met, now a place that felt like a symbol rather than a memory of hardship. She knelt briefly to touch the cracked pavement, remembering the fear, pain, and uncertainty that had once defined her life. He stood beside her silently, understanding that this moment was sacred, a quiet acknowledgement of how far she had come. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." He smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No," he said. "Thank you for trusting me. And for reminding me of what really matters." By the time they left the alley, her past felt like a shadow that no longer controlled her, and her future stretched out before her, full of possibilities. The bond between them had grown into something profound, a partnership forged not by wealth or circumstance, but by mutual respect, trust, and the courage to care when it mattered most. For the first time, she understood that life could be more than mere survival. And in that understanding, she found freedom, purpose, and hope, a future she was finally ready to embrace.